Last Sunday, we had 6 people get baptized, and it was one of my favorite Sundays in a while. It was so rich. One of the couples that got baptized was Brent and Ruby. And they're engaged, and I can't think of a better really foundation for someone who's engaged to get baptized. They got baptized together, and it was such a step of faith. We always talk about baptism is this step of faith where we're really becoming public in our declaration of Jesus. But here's what's remarkable about this moment. That guy next to him, that's Ruby's ex-husband. We always invite people like, hey, if you are helping disciple or you're bringing someone into a relationship with Jesus, we want you baptizing them alongside our pastors. So think about this. Someone's ex-husband, like they got divorced, like God who's so good and he redeemed this relationship and they came to know Jesus and they got baptized together last weekend. And it was just one of those moments where you're thinking, Lord, I mean, you can do anything, God. Like there is no limit to what God can do. And I wish I could tell you every story of every person that got baptized last week. I mean, each of their stories are remarkable, but I want to tell you one more. There was a young woman named Amy, and Amy came to me right before service, and she said, hey, I want to get baptized today, but she goes, I got to be honest, I'm kind of afraid of being in front of people. I said, Amy, let me just remind you, fear of public speaking, being up in front of large crowds, that's the number one fear of people. People are more afraid of being in front of people than they are of death, right? I mean, it's a massive fear that a majority of the population faces. And I said, Amy, I want to remind you, though, that your decision, God's going to give you the grace and the faith to make this decision today. And if you love Jesus, this isn't just for you, it's for every person in the room, every person that's been part of your journey and your faith and the people that invited you to church, the people that have been discipling you. All those people have played a role in the decision that you're making. So just be encouraged because it's not just for you, it's for every one of us in this church community and family. And here's the reality. Oftentimes when it comes to overwhelming circumstances, our response is one of two things. It's either it's fight or flight, right? We either have fear and we want to fight, or we want to just take off running. Those are usually the two responses that most of us have. But we talked about this last week. There's a third option for any of us in relationship with Jesus. And it's this response of faith. To choose to follow God, to choose to live for him, to choose to say, listen, this is what I'm going to do. And we can have faith because God is faithful, church. He is so faithful to us. Last weekend, Amy made the decision to stand up in front of our whole church and get baptized. She made the decision to choose faith over running, over fighting. She chose faith over all of those things. And I'm so proud of her for making that choice. We're in this series called Enough. It's ending the thinking that we're not enough. And we have a passion as a church to help you live in the place that God created you to live in. We have a passion, we have a desire, we have a burden. We want to see you break free from all those things that God never created you to live in, the mindsets, the identities, all these different things that God said, I never created you for that. He created us to live in this place of freedom, to come to this reality that we are truly enough in him. And so we've been going through this, we've been walking through this. And if you have struggled in this thinking, please know you're not alone. For significant chunks of my life, I have wrestled with this idea that I'm not enough. I'm not enough for God. I'm not enough for my family. I'm not enough to pastor this church. I just have gotten stuck in that. And I'm going to tell you a very significant story next week of when I really wrestled this. I mean, the worst part of my life when it came to this identity, this idea of enough. But know this, it's not just you. It's not just me. I've been a pastor now for almost 20 years, and I've watched again and again and again. I've met hundreds of people that have wrestled with this idea. Am I enough? Am I enough? Do I have enough? But it's not just you and me and all these other people. The gentleman we're looking at in the Bible, his name was Moses. Moses struggled with this significantly. Moses, who's one of the greatest leaders, greatest people in all the Old Testament, struggled with this so much in his life. He struggled with this idea of, is he enough? And my hope for you today as we get into this in Exodus chapter 2 is that you would take that next step to end the thinking that you're not enough. Let's look at this together. Exodus chapter 2, I want to pick it up in verse 23. It says, years passed, and the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under the burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then he looked down on the people of Israel, and he knew that it was time to act. Today, we can have faith because he is faithful. God looked down, and he realized that it was time to act. We talked about this last week, that as followers of Jesus, we come into this place where we are living in the will of God and the way of God and the time of God. And that's always the hardest. I mean, we understand the will of God. We open up his word and we read a few pages and it becomes very clear. But the way is kind of that next step, and it's harder. It's challenging to trust the ways of God because we want it our way right away, right? Burger King had it right? Like we want it our way right away. But then even the next step, which is even more challenging, is the timing of God. We can get the will of God, we can get the way of God, but we so often miss the timing of God. And it says this in the next verse, Exodus 3, verse 1. It says, one day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. Now, we read this chapter like it's just kind of casual, one day, right? But the book of Acts, Acts 7, kind of gives us a little bit more detail to this. And this is what Acts 7 tells us in verse 30. It says, 40 years later, in the desert near Mount Sinai. All right? Exodus is like, hey, yeah, just one day, right? No, Acts explains, Moses has been in this place for 40 years. I'm going to come back to this, okay? But just, I want you to take note of that. It's significant. Then verse 2 of Exodus 3. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't this bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush. Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. And listen to this. Now go. For I'm sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Now, if you've been in this series at all, whether you've been watching online or you've been here in church, and you've been following this series with Moses, you might have a thought right now. You might have the thought that God got the wrong guy. Moses, as you remember, was a murderer. He took God's plan into his own hands, and he literally killed someone, and then he attempted to bury them in the sand, and then when it was found out the next day, he became a fugitive. He's on Pharaoh, who's the leader of Egypt, who was actually his adopted grandfather. He's on like #1 hit list, right? Like he's on Egypt's FBI most wanted list, whatever you want to call it. Moses is the guy on the list. He's now been on the run for 4 decades. Some of you aren't even 4 decades old yet, right? Some of you are like, you just hit it. You had a great birthday. You're like, 40 is the new 30. This is awesome. But regardless, For 40 years of his life, Moses has been on the run. And God says, Moses, I want you to now lead my people out of slavery into freedom. And if you've been following us, you're thinking, this is crazy. But God didn't get the wrong person. God never misses. He never approaches the wrong person. He never invites the wrong person. God didn't get the wrong person. You might be saying, Ezra, but Moses was disqualified. He killed someone. Instead of owning up to his responsibility and doing the time for his crime, he took off and he's been on the run. He's disqualified. But here's what we know about God. No one is ever disqualified when it comes to God. Culture says you make a mistake and you're done, right? One and done. But it's different with God. Culture would say this. Culture would say, what? You're canceled, right? We hear that all the time, don't we? God says, no, you're continued. Culture would say that you are denied, but God would say what? You're approved. You're not denied. You're not denied, you're approved. Culture would say that you're done, but Christ would say, listen, you've just begun. Your moment, your story, your journey, the things that you're doing, it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. I've lived for a minute now, and I've seen this again and again and again. I've yet to meet someone that has not had something in their life that would disqualify them. I've yet to meet someone other than Jesus that just got it right. They lived a flawless life. They were just perfect. They did everything they were supposed to do. They always got it right. They were just getting straight A's in life all the time, right? I've yet to meet that person. Maybe that's you. I'd love to meet you after service. I want to hear your story. But we all live with this. We live with this mindset, this disqualifying mindset. If you don't believe me, think about this. When was the last time you said this statement to yourself, I could never, and then fill in the blank? That statement is a disqualifying statement. You are literally already disqualifying yourself when you say that statement. I could never do this. And now there's sometimes like, man, I could never eat like mussels, right? Like that's just not my thing, right? But I'm talking about when it comes to life. The things that we said that we could never do, the things that we would long to do. We've already disqualified ourselves before we've even started. Go back in history to me. Remember when they said that humanity, that people would never be able to fly? We laugh about that now. But that was a real thing, right? People were disqualified from flying. People will never be able to fly. Remember when they said people will never go into outer space? Now it's like every week I'm reading about someone from Amazon or Tesla is up in space, and it's just like a weekly occurrence now, right? Remember when they said that you could never talk to someone in another city or state or country? And now we FaceTime. FaceTiming a friend this week. He was in Argentina. We're FaceTiming together. Not just talking on the phone. I'm seeing his face. I'm seeing the expressions. All those things were never supposed to be, never supposed to happen, could never happen. All those things were disqualified until someone said, no, we can. I believe we can. I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And that's true for you. That's true for your life. You were not meant to live this disqualified life. We need to step out of this. We need to stop thinking this way. I love what Romans says. Romans tells us this. In Romans 12, verse 2, it says, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. How does God transform us? He transforms us through our thinking, right? Amy was transformed last week. She was transformed from her thinking of believing, I can do this. And that moment of going from death to life, right? Getting baptized, one of the most transformational things that you could ever do. But it started with a thought. The thought that says, well, God can do this, and God wants me to do this, and other people are here in my corner cheering me on, and I'm going to do this. I grew up in the 90s, and there was this phrase we used to use all the time in the 90s called DIS, D-I-S. Do you guys, any of you remember this? Yeah, come on. Like, right? And we would say these kinds of things to each other, like, oh, that person was talking trash to you. They just dissed you, right? And that was like a put down. Like for some of you, you're like, what is he talking about? That was, help me out. Like it was disrespectful. Yes, thank you, right? Here's what you have to see. Here's what you have to understand. Some of you need to go 90s, and you need to diss your disqualification. You've been literally holding on to this disqualification, and you need to diss it, right? But not in the sense that you're just going to put it down. What you need to do is truly to discontinue, to disassociate, to disembark from your disqualification. Turn to the person next to you and say, diss your disqualification. Shout it down that aisle, because you know what? Like, tell them, just say, hey, today you need to diss your disqualification. Whatever that thing in your life that you're thinking it's holding me back, it's keeping me, it is attached to me, and I just can't get rid of it, guess what? You have to disassociate yourself from that thing. And the only way you can do that is in Jesus. He's the only one through his resurrected power that you can do that. When I used to hear the word disqualified, I used to think of myself. I don't think that anymore. But I did. For a long period of my life, I'd hear that word and I think, I'm disqualified. You know what I think of now? I think of a runner running a race. When I hear that word, what comes to my mind is a runner running the race. And what happens? They're running and they're passing the baton to the next person, right? So just, it's that handoff, right? And you got to get that handoff right. And if this drops, I'm not going to drop it. But if this drops, what happens? You're disqualified. Is that runner disqualified for the rest of their lives? No. They got another race. Maybe that afternoon, maybe that hour, right? But with our disqualification, we think that we're disqualified for the rest of our lives. Like we made a mistake, and now for the rest of my life, I got to live this out. Church, we need to think more like runners. Like, man, I dropped the baton, but I got another race. I got another day. I got another hour, and it's time to keep going. I gotta dust off my pride. I gotta dust off the mistake, and I gotta keep going, right? Here's the challenge. The enemy wants you to believe the lie that your disqualification is for the rest of your life. He wants you to believe this lie that disqualification is for every day from now till the day that you die. He's the father of lies. It's what he does. He lies to you. He lies to you. We have to realize it's a lie. We can't buy into the lie. For some of us, this lie has costed us way too much. Way too much time. Way too much of our identity. We've stopped living. We've lost relationships because of the lie that we believed that we were disqualified. God says, get up. Shake off that dust and keep going. Keep going. You might have lost a race, but you haven't lost at life. This disqualification does not define you. There are more days, better days ahead. Why? Because of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That changes everything for us. For every single one of us, we come into this relationship with Jesus and we go through this and we experience this, and God says, no, I went to the cross for that. I went to the cross for you. And you no longer need to hold on to that anymore. It's forgiven. It's finished. You're free. And we take that, and now we have a whole new way of living. Let me say it again. Your disqualification does not need to define you. Today, make the choice to say, I'm going to receive the forgiveness of God. I'm going to walk out in his goodness, in his life, in his mercy. I'm going to walk this out in him. The second thing is this. Just like disqualification, there's detours, right? Just like this thing of disqualification, we all go through detours in our lives. For Moses, it was a 40-year detour, a 4-decade detour. That is a long time, right? That's a long time to be living away from your purpose, to be living away from your meaning, to be living away from who God created you to be, who he called you to be. That's a long detour, right? I mean, that is just the way it is. But just like with a disqualification in a race, a detour doesn't have to be the rest of your lives. When you're driving and you get on a detour, and I know there's a lot of them right now because there's just construction everywhere we go, what happens? You get on the detour, and then where do you go? You follow the signs and you get right back on the right path, the right track, the right road. My kids' school right now they're just ripping up all kinds of roads around it. Like, it's been totally transformed. And last night, we're coming home from the event my wife was talking about, and I'm driving. I'm like, I'm going to cut by the school. And I come to where I normally would turn, and the road is gone. It's just gone. I'm like, do we take it? Like, come on, let's have an adventure, baby. She's like, no. My car just got washed. Like, don't go through that, whatever that is. And we got to get home. So what happens? We go all the way around. We get on the right road, and we get home. It was a detour. But it wasn't permanent. It wasn't forever. Now, sometimes we get on detours in life, and we just get stuck. Can you imagine, like, getting on a detour and just being like, I'm going to keep just driving the detour today, right? Like, I'm just going to take another lap around the detour. Some of us are doing that in life right now. Some of us, we're like Moses, we're just on this detour, and we're stuck on the loop of this detour. And we're just going through the motions, and we're like, man, I don't even realize. I never got to the destination because I'm just stuck on this detour. Some of you are on a detour right now, and you're kind of having a moment of crisis. Like, this detour is going to take me the rest of my life. It's not. Again, the other day, I'm taking our kids and a little girl that we carpool with home from school, and there's a detour, right? Because there's just construction everywhere where we live. And we get on this detour, and they're hungry, and it's been a long day at school, and I'm like, guys, we got to take a detour. And they're like, what? Oh my gosh, we're going to starve. We're going to die. Like they just got so dramatic. Guess how long the detour was? 4 minutes. It was a 4-minute detour, right? And as we're pulling in the neighborhood, I get real sarcastic, like I sometimes do, and I'm like, hey guys, how we doing? Like, we're fine. Everyone made it? Did anyone starve? Did anyone die? Did anyone pee their pants? Right? And they hate my sarcasm, like, Dad, you know. I'm like, guys, come on. It's just a detour, right? This detour that you're on right now, man, it's so easy to get right on the right track. Back on track with what God has for you. But again, this is why we need God. He's the one that gets us out of the detour into the place that He has for us. He's the one that says, it's time for you to get back on track in your life, right? If you're living on a detour, I want you to know today God can put you right back on track, right back in the place that He has for you. If you're stuck in the loop of this detour, God can put you right back where He needs to. But my question for you today is this: what is your detour? What is the thing that has caused you to go on a detour, that has put you on the wrong track in your life? Is it a relationship? Is it a vocation? Is it a habit? Is it an addiction? Is it a lifestyle? Is it a circle of friends? What has caused you to get off of the road and the highway that God has for you? How long have you been on it? How long are you going to stay on it? Are you going to choose just to keep the same pattern of thinking? Are you going to choose to stay in that toxic relationship? Are you going to choose to live for yourself and not surrender to God? Or are you going to truly trust Him to say, God, I'm going to surrender my life to you today? I believe every single one of us is on a journey. I believe the best place that we can be is when Jesus has the wheel, right? Like, Jesus, you take the wheel, like that old country song would say, and there's no better place to be. And when you've come to that place, roll down the windows, crank up the music, enjoy the ride. It's not always perfect. Doesn't mean that you're not going to hit traffic or construction or some crazy storm like we had Friday night, but guess what? When you're trusting Jesus, there's no better way to live. There's no better way to enjoy the journey of your life. Here's the thing. It's not just about the disqualifications and the detours. There's a third thing I just want to see in the life of Moses. Because if we don't deal with the disqualifications, they can easily turn into detours. But when we do, then we pursue the destiny that God has for us. You can live a life of disqualification. You can live a life on a detour. You can say, God, I want to live a life of destiny. I want to live a life of purpose. I want to live a life of significance. I want to know that I'm enough. And you made me enough. And I'm trusting you in this. Every single one of us has a choice. Will you allow your disqualifications and detours to stop you from your destiny? Or will you allow your disqualifications and detours to shape you and shape your destiny and influence the things that God has for you? What do I mean? This is what I mean. Moses was on a detour for 40 years of his life. 4 decades of his life, he's on a detour. And God says, okay, Moses, you're my man. I want you now to lead the people out of slavery. And guess what happens? Not only God leads them out of slavery, spoiler alert, if you haven't read ahead, you don't know the story, but then God leads them into the promised land. Guess how long it takes them to get to the promised land? 40 years. Who's better qualified than someone who's been on a detour for 40 years to lead people on another detour for 40 years, right? God knew it all. I mean, he knows everything. And he said, okay, this is what's gonna happen. I'm gonna take a man, I'm gonna use a man who went through a 4-decade detour to now lead the people on the same kind of detour. Here's what I believe. I believe that sometimes our disqualifications are the very things that shape us for our destiny. I believe that. I see that all the time in our church. I see people that were once alcoholics now helping people that are alcoholics. And guess what? There's no one more qualified to help someone than they've walked through that together. I've seen addicts walk through addiction and find freedom, find healing, find breakthrough. And guess what? They start helping people that are in the middle of addiction. No one's better qualified. No one's better equipped to walk that out with them than those people. I've seen people that said, man, my life, I've gone through all kinds of things. I've lost all kinds of things. I've learned all kinds of things. And now I'm doing the same thing for others. Your disqualification, or maybe let me take it one step further, your pain, your heartache, your difficulties, God can use them to help other people. The first time we went through a miscarriage, someone told me, they said, God's gonna use this to help other people. In that moment, I didn't want to hear that. But so many times, we've had so many conversations with so many people because we know that pain, we know that loss. My wife's brother overdosed 4 years ago, passed away. God's used her in so many ways through that pain to help other people that have gone through similar kinds of things. God can use your detours. He can use your disqualifications, your pain, all those things to help shape and to help serve other people. I think about one of our church council members, Dave Carey. He spent 6.5 years in a prisoner of war camp. Detour. Not a detour he chose, but a detour. Now, for the last almost 60 years, God's been using that detour to help so many other men and women that have served in our nation that are coming back with all kinds of things. God used his detour to help shape the destinies of other people. That's what God does. That is our God. Today, can we just draw a line in the sand and saying, no longer am I going to allow these disqualifications to stop me from serving God and living for God and helping other people? Can we just make a decision to say, I'm no longer going to allow that detour to be something that I don't allow God to use for his kingdom and for other people and to serve and to care and to love and to help other people get unstuck, to help other people get out of their detour and onto the road that God would have for them? Can we just make those decisions today? I want to conclude with this. I think it's fascinating that God chose a bush and fire to appear to Moses. Usually when God appears to people, he does it in a number of different ways, but more often than not, it's an angel. It's an angel coming to God, and their first phrase is, do not be afraid. And like, we always look at that and we're like, why would they be, man, those angels are intimidating, right? Like you see an angel, I'm asking you the same question I asked those kids on our little detour. Did anyone pee their pants, right? Is everyone good? Right, are we okay? God chooses a bush, and he doesn't just choose a bush, he chooses fire. God could have talked from the bush. He could have caused the bush to move in a way that would get Moses' attention. He could have pulled an Abraham and put a ram in the bush. God could have done a whole bunch of different things. God chose fire. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I've been thinking about this for a really long time. And here's my best guess. I'm not saying this is why. Here's my best guess, though. I think one of the reasons God did this is because Moses had lost the fire inside of himself. Moses had lost the passion. Moses had lost the desire. It was no longer there. The fire was gone. The fire had gone out in his life. The disqualification, the detour, had taken the fire away from him. And God would say, Moses, I'm choosing you. I'm choosing you to lead my people out of slavery. But guess what? I'm going to put a fire right back inside of you. I'm going to put a passion. I'm going to put a reason. I'm going to put a purpose. I'm going to put all those things back inside of you. And he did. Moses had that passion again. As we continue to journey through this, you're going to see a man who's bold. He's bold, he's passionate, he's got that fire within him, and nothing is gonna stop him from what God has called him to do. And for you today, maybe you find yourself just in a place where you're saying, man, I've lost that passion, I've lost that fire. I once had it. I once had a passion to live, I once had a fire within me, but it's gone. It's gone. And today, God would say to you, it's time for you to get it back. It's time for you to live again. It's time for you to dream again. It's time for you to have an experience in me, to live, to wake up with purpose and intentionality, to wake up with the fire of God inside of you once again. Today is your day. Today is your day to live again, to have that passion again. Would you bow your heads with me today? Today is that day that we can begin to end the thinking that we're not enough because our disqualifications no longer have to define us. Today is the day that we can begin to end the thinking that we're not enough because what once